Yes, sir.
All right. And it is recording, so you're good.
Cool. Just sharing. Can everyone see this? Just give me like a heads up in
Yeah, looks good, man.
Okay, cool. All right, so today's workshop is kind of different than our general workshop where we are kind of focusing on CS careers. Everyone is getting interview offers or you're applying for jobs, and you'll keep doing this cycle until like December, or like many people even get their internships in April because someone dropped out and there's an opening and you got an internship or full-time offer. So it's really important to just understand what are the different phases and like different paths for CS careers. And this is kind of where we are taking this workshop. And this is, if you have questions at any point, just put it in the chat and we'll answer them as soon as it's possible, because everything is a two-way street in this one. Like it's more informal. You can ask us anything and we can answer it to the best at that slide. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. So yeah, again, the agenda is walk you through the different paths of CS careers, and there's a lot actually, and we'll try our best to go through each one, and then just answer a few questions on just like any questions you have, and then if you want, we can also talk about what each of the workshops officers have done in terms of like work experience and what was our experience in all those different roles. So yeah, each slide will have a meme. Feel free to put a lol in the chat. Righty. So yeah, so this is a list of different paths you can do in computer science and engineering. We have, again, so first one is software developer, which pretty simple. You develop software for a lot of people. And there's a lot of different roles with that, like backend, front end, full stack, game, mobile, framework, operating systems, DevOps. We're going through each one, but that's kind of what we even stuck one funny one, and if you find it, just let us know. But yeah, so we are doing this like different software development tracks. Then there's consultant, which also does all of those different tracks, but then it's a different kind of role where you do different kind of, it's a different process when doing consulting than software development. Not extremely different technically, but different fundamentally when it comes to solving problems. Then there's data analyst or data scientist. As Rohit said last meeting, he was the representative from GM. No one knows the difference, so we go with both of them. And then there's obviously the education field. So you can become a professor doing a PhD, or you can go into research. These are different paths that you can take via education fields. Product management is another big one out there where like you get paid kind of more than a software developer, but you also work kind of more than a software developer in another sense where like you have to do a lot of documentation, a lot of communication. So not very hard skills, but soft skills is the key point here with product management. So if you feel like you're not so good with code, but good with talking with other people and just understanding code, then product management is the route for you. And then there's security analyst, where you make something secure and try and break it and make it secure again. So that's basically that role. Yeah, so let's get straight into it.
All right. And to start off, we're going to go with front end. And this is probably one of the most popular fields that software developers have gotten into, and that you'll find a lot of students making their own projects in and such. And that's basically code that deals with running in a browser. And when you apply for a job, this the job posting might say like front end, or it might just be labeled as a web developer. And some people might get mixed up and think that this also like holds mobile applications, but they're actually two separate fields. So when someone refers to themselves as a front end developer, they're usually dealing with frameworks such as HTML or frameworks such as React and JavaScript and dealing with HTML and CSS. So it's a pretty well-sized category. There's a lot of freelance opportunities to go out and make projects for individual businesses, and also bigger companies have a lot of front-end developers as well. So these developers tend to have a good sense with UI and UX design. You tend to deal with some programs such as Figma or InVision, where you get the design straight from the product team, and then you kind of have to translate what they want it to look like directly to code, and then also integrate back with the either APIs or databases. So yeah, next slide. So next, opposite of front end, we have backend. So these are generally good if you like dealing with your algorithms and data structures. You're very passionate in that kind of stuff, and you're not really looking at the UI sort of stuff. This is what is actually going to be talking to your databases and what your front end is going to be talking to, right? So these are generally coded using JavaScript frameworks such as Node.js. We also have a few Java frameworks such as Spring Boot. You could make a API using Python, and that would also count as your backend, right? So you're going to be talking to your database, collecting information, and then relaying that information back to an API where your front end could call and then use that data. So there's a lot of logic and efficiencies being handled behind the scenes in this kind of role. And it's a pretty technical role as well. And then next is full stack. So this is a term to describe kind of a job that you kind of know a little bit of everything. You've done projects in both the front end and back end, and you know how to basically make a full project, something that's well developed, has databases front end, and these jobs will generally extend the whole gamut of development. Ishri? Okay. Yeah, so that was front end. And then next is mobile. So mobile developers are usually self-taught. That's personally where I've had the most experience in. I really enjoy it, and it's really sought after in a company because it's very technical and kind of niche, right? But that also has its drawbacks because it's so niche. Whenever a new version of, say, Swift or the next deployment of Android comes out, you have to work pretty hard to keep up with those. And it's kind of a constant fight of updating apps and being up to date with your frameworks and making sure that you're kind of on the bleeding edge. So it's a very interesting role. And the developers tend to be very passionate about what they're doing because they're all kind of from the same community. So some popular tech stacks in here include Swift and Objective-C for iOS, Java and Kotlin for Android. And then you have some cross-platform frameworks such as Flutter and React Native.
So the next kind of section we're going to move into is game design and game development. I know a lot of you guys probably play video games, so it's come across your mind once or twice, like maybe I should go work for a game company. And they're really awesome companies and they produce really awesome products. And it's great that we get to interact with them every day. If you want to get in this industry, they normally use frameworks like Unity and Unreal Engine. And those languages normally that you need to know in order to code in those would be like C++, Java, C#, and a few others. I know for like, if you want to do iOS, you want to do Swift. But typically you also have like a knack for playing games. Like I said, a lot of us already like to play games. And so having that passion, that drive to develop a game that you really love is something that you see in a lot of indie game developers, and you see at some companies as well. But one of the downsides is of the industry, it's really competitive and it moves quickly. And there's been a lot of circulating news about how these game companies burn their workers out. But we've seen a lot of companies now move their hard deadlines to accommodate, maybe making the game a little bit better, while also giving their workers a little bit extra time to breathe. because if you work for Activision, you're expected to make a COD game every year. And so that can be a little stressful after a while. But being able to move in a fast-paced environment is definitely a necessity for game development. Next slide. So infrastructure and DevOps. This is kind of a role that not many people know about before they go work at like a bigger company. DevOps is really the backbone of the software development team. They don't really develop any consumer-facing code, but what they do is they keep the engineering teams afloat. You might use a series of internal tools, or you integrate with third-party software such as like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform. And this team is responsible for integrating it with your environment while also keeping the services you need up for maybe to test your code or to upload your code in version control. So if you want to work in this role, you want to have a firm grasp on scripting languages such as Python, Perl, and Ruby, because you will be doing a lot of automation. And like Shrey said, yeah, this is probably one of the more paying or well-paid roles out of all the ones that we're going to talk about tonight, because it's something that not a ton of people know about, and it's not as flashy as, you know, front-end development or game development, but it's a really necessary role, and a lot of the company relies on these teams, and that's why they're paid so much, is because they're crucial for the software development process. Can you go to the next slide? The next one is quality assurance, or QA, and testing. So like the first bullet point says, it's often overlooked, but it's really, really crucial in software development. A lot of the times we like to create new features and brainstorm new ones right away after we code it up. But if you work in an internship in software development, you'll realize that coding is one of the things you do the least. You plan a lot, you talk about different solutions, and you test your solutions a lot more than you actually implement new code. So quality assurance and testing is really, really crucial. And they have, bigger companies, they have teams that are dedicated to this. So when a software developer finishes his code, maybe it's a front-end person, the QA will then test the different elements they added to a web page and make sure that they work as expected and as the product manager intended it to be. And we'll talk about that role later tonight. But yeah, before a new update or release is sent out, the team will handle the job of finding any bugs and testing extensively. Not only is this just clicking a button and saying this works, but going down different paths the user might perform in order to get to that button. So like what happens when I log in, go to a few pages, log out, log in, and go, like all these different paths could produce a different bug. And so trying to cover all those different test cases is a really difficult task, but it's really awesome when you're kind of in the zone and working on that. I did one of my first internships with it, and I thought it was an awesome job to do. And the next slide. We also decided to throw in security analyst. This was more just to cover the cybersecurity side of software development. In a software developer or software development team, you normally have a security engineer. And so what they do is normally before production, after all the code's tested and you've developed all the features that you want, the security engineer will typically go in and just make sure that there's no crucial security flaws in it. But your job at the end of the day is to keep the intellectual property information secure of that company. And so if you allow just maybe there's a insecure input field on a page, and you could perform like an SQL injection against it, that your company will be liable for any information that is lost or breached. And so it's really important that a security analyst does their job in order to keep the company secure. But there's also a lot more roles than just being a security engineer. Cybersecurity is really, really broad, but I wanted to just cover over this next one, security analyst, just like, because that's more around the software development sphere of influence. So security analysts, a lot of times you'll be working on scripting languages. It's got to be like Bash or Python, and you'll be automating some remedial tasks. You'll find that a lot of cybersecurity is parsing through giant data sets or logs of machines and figuring out what the story is with all those logs. So you might be looking at authentication logs or the logs of a software that maybe your software developers write. and trying to piece together, are there any malicious things that are happening on my network or anything that's happening in our application, and then taking care of it. But the cybersecurity industry is a very fast growing field, and we're quickly seeing bigger companies put a major focus on it. So it's definitely an industry you would want to get in if you're interested in cybersecurity, because it's going to be around for a very, very long time.
Okay, I guess I take over here. Yeah, so next role is consultant. There's a lot of different things that I said about consultant during the going through every path, but essentially it's doing every one of these roles that we mentioned earlier, but in a different manner, where it involves you working on that role for, let's say, X months, then just stop doing that because you completed the project and jumping onto another role for another 6 months or 3 months or 1 month, depends, right? And you can be doing juggling up multiple of these roles at once. So like you might be a backend engineer for one of the projects and might be a front-end engineer for other projects, and you might just do some totally different work for another one of the projects. That's what is good with consulting, where like you can wear a lot of hats and you can gain that experience. But then it also is that you will have a lot of different clients, a lot of communication, making sure that your code stays readable after it's published with the client, because the client will be able to maintain it. And it kind of gets stressful at points because you might have to travel a lot. You might have to like stay away from your house. You might not be at a single location, but then it also brings its perks, like you can drive fancy cars and stay in fancy hotels, right? So there's pros and cons for each one. But then what's probably the most important thing is, as I mentioned earlier, you wear a lot of hats. So it's a great way of gaining experience right out of college, because you will have experience of every single field in, let's say, 2 or 3 years. And then you will be ready for like the proper industry if you just want to pick a role and go into that company, because you already know what that role entails for you. Yeah, so the next position is of data analyst and data scientist. This is kind of where things get kind of wacky and go towards math, or in deep computer science, so towards machine learning or AI. But then it might just be just data management. So yeah, this is one of the fastest growing fields in technology, and it sometimes relates a lot with computer security, as Ryan was mentioning, because it's a growing field. Like we just recognize what data is, and we're still growing towards it. So yeah, you will look at a lot of different and new technologies every single day and process vast amounts of data. If you really like looking at numbers and figuring out why this number was -1 instead of 0, or why this number was so high and everything else was so low, this might be the field for you, because that's literally what it entails, like figuring out problems and then solving them for most parts. And then the other part of it, which is processing this data to resolve problems, or like to bring up new values of this data set. So let's say we have data. This is what I did in one of my internships, where we had data of 15 different engineers and their code time. So we knew that they were coding on X time, Y time, Z time, and we knew how many lines they were coding on at that time. With that data, you had to come up with a proper time when everyone can have a meeting where no one is coding to their best capacity, right? So that's kind of a data science problem, because you're given this data and then you have to process it to find this one solution. And the solution might be different. So it's an algorithm that you develop to get that solution based on the data. You might use different frameworks like R and Python, and then there's a lot of different programming libraries that you can use, and it goes very, very deep, but that's kind of the general idea. Yeah, education, as I said, you can go into being a professor or a researcher, and well, it mostly involves in teaching students about very basic languages, and then it also involves a lot of very high level research, which comes with your research topic, right? So it's juggling two different sides of computer science. And if you like that, if you like a super stable job, if you're set on just learning and helping people learn, this is potentially a job for you. Education, usually PhD students or even professors, they start a lot of startups with complex fields. Like this summer, I met a professor who was a PhD in computer science, but had his bachelor's in biology. And he's working on a genetics research where he could change the gene of a mosquito and deploy that mosquito, a family of mosquitoes, and deploy them to Africa, that could wipe out the total existence of mosquitoes in Africa in, let's say, 10 years. That's what he's working on. So he's working on these cool, super high level in the sense like super complex technologies that can do crazy things as a PhD. And now he owns a startup and he got funded and everything. So there are topics which require you to have PhDs to handle it. And this might be the right path for it. Like initially you might not get paid as much, but once you are that guy, like who figured out how to do that, like that's probably at the brink of the best genetics research with computer science research that you can do. So that what entails you. But again, going back to this kind of education topic is, so yeah, common points like you can influence other students, you can do research, and as I said, like it's kind of secured. Like it's the one job that will last forever and that will always be secure. So the comment which says, I feel like killing all mosquitoes is a bad idea in the long run. I totally agree, but it's just that the reason why I mentioned it is because they made that possible. Like they kind of reached that level of genetic engineering where like all the mosquitoes will not die. Basically, their populations will die. So they will have a normal life, but their progeny, so whenever they reproduce, there it is, yeah. But yeah, their progenies will not be able to reproduce. So it'll be the last generation of mosquitoes. Which also means that they could engineer it in a way where they could not spread malaria or something like that. Going back to topic, product management. This is one of the most interesting fields in computer science because it does not involve as much coding, but it still involves a very fundamental requirement of understanding what code is and how to read it. So yeah, you might manage different teams at once. You have a lot of documentation to do. You have a lot of understanding of what is happening and what is the next step in the whole process. You are kind of like the bridge between the non-technical and the technical team. You are also keeping track of how each team is doing and managing each sprint. If you don't know Agile, sprint is just a cool way of saying that, hey, this is a short deadline you must meet. We look at the next deadline from that point and figure out the tasks for that one. So it's kind of like you break the task into smaller deadlines and they're kind of flexible in terms of the tasks per deadline. So you decide that before each sprint. Going back to this, yeah, so like you have to communicate a lot between the technical, the non-technical teams, the stakeholders, obviously, and also just understanding what technical knowledge is needed to execute this task. I had this one friend who was doing, I think, masters in just image processing, and he was an APM at Google. He was working on the Pixels camera, and all of his job was just documenting what each team was doing because it was so technically intense. Like they had to keep notes of like, if any other team would come in at that point, they would need that documentation to just get started in terms of technicalities for getting to know how the camera executes X step or Y step. right? So it involves technicalities in a different way than coding, where it involves explaining it in a common tongue, or even in like a more focused tongue to other engineers about what you're doing and how you're doing it, and managing your team at the same time. Yeah, and then there's so many fields. Every day new fields get created. Some old fields die. Like COBOL was all the rage 20 years ago. It's not, right? So fields will come up and other fields will go out. Like it keeps going, but you have to keep exploring, and that's kind of what we wanted you to. That was kind of what our takeaway was from this workshop, is that you understand what to look for while doing a job. And yeah, that's it. Any questions?
And these questions don't have to be limited to just like what we talked about tonight. If you have questions on like where to get started for like an internship, or how the internship process works, or what an internship is like, we're also here to answer that as well.
Yeah, literally any question if you have like.
I have a question regarding like internships. So I'm a computer engineer, and this is my third semester. As you all know, for spring and how it went on for COVID. And I basically was with just Python, like learning Python. So I wasn't been able to like join any internship since I don't have like any experience in the field yet. And summer, you know, guys, how it went. So this is fall, and I'm taking like some classes in my major. So I haven't looked around, like to be specific. I haven't looked around in any companies and everything. But how actually like the process and how it looks like, and how can I like, I mean, how and when should I start like looking?
Can you repeat the last part? It was kind of like hazy, or maybe it's just my connection.
Well, I was asking if like when and how can I start like looking for internships, since I'm just started with classes with the major. So yeah, that's actually a question.
Makes sense. Yeah. So I think Jonathan and Ryan would both agree when I say like it's never late to apply anywhere. Just apply, right? Even if they don't take like when I started applying, I was an electrical engineer, and my first internship was in computer science, right? So I had no clue of like the language I would be coding in, or I didn't even know like the basics of many things. I learned them on the internship. That's what they are for learning about technologies they use in the industry. All you need is like a basic experience of like what are, like if you know C++, if you're taken 121, I think that's good enough to go into an internship, at least for now. Like eventually you might need like CSE 221 and CSE 411, but like just to get started, 121 is good enough. You can do so many things. You can try and apply to these companies, like let's say Capture. Capture it does consulting, and it does so many things where like they might have jobs for like students who just know one thing, but they know one thing well, and you can do that, right? You can also learn a lot via those. Like, I think my first internship, the first 3 weeks, I just spent learning about different stuff that they use in the company, and it was a consulting company. And then I said, okay, yeah, now I'm ready for my project, right? So they're pretty open. Like, you can just apply and see if the way I landed my first internship was I interviewed for some other company. They said, oh, unfortunately, we don't hire students who are like electrical engineers, but like I was transitioning into computer engineering. And I said, okay, but they said like, we really like you, so we would like to send your resume to all of our sister companies. And that's how I landed my first internship. They liked me so much that they spread my resume to these other companies that I did not know of, and they offered me a job, right? So there's always opportunity somewhere. You just need to keep applying.
I would also say a lot of people, when they're applying for internships, they think they need to be the best of the best in order to get the job. And if an internship in the job details does say like desires to have experience in like C++, it's probably a good idea to learn a little bit of C++, maybe do a small project on it. But you don't need to be a resident expert at it, because the internship is for you to learn. It's not for you to just have a job for 10 weeks. So a lot of the times they look for you to have just a tiny bit of experience, but really just have the passion and drive to be able to learn and adapt in those 10 weeks. Because I've seen so many people in the internships I'm in where they have not really worked with the stuff we've been using before, but that's their time to shine and learn about all these things that the company uses. So yeah, I wouldn't say that experience is really required to have a job at Google or Apple or, and I mean, it would make you more competitive, but at the end of the day, I don't think that that's going to be the sole thing that decides if you get a job or not.
Yeah, makes sense. So yeah, when Capture came in, I was thinking like this is such a great place to start with. And also for the classes that he talked about, I'm actually taking 221 right now. I got 121 done. So I'm basically an intermediate level with C++, kind of confident of writing some projects on my own. And then Python, like beginner Python, I can say. So I now I see myself have like pretty good knowledge in coding that I can start looking. And then like that's the thing. I just like don't have much experience of looking, but I will start learning this. Thank you all so much.
No worries. One question that we have in the chat, we have a couple now actually. I think the first one here is, what would freshmen be working on? I think what you're asking is like, if you were to get an internship as a freshman, like what would you be applying as or what would you be going for? And I think that's pretty much the same. It would fall under the same boat as sophomore or junior, right? Anything that you apply for is generally like a general application. Whenever you go to the job, it'll either be like just a general application like software developer, or it can range from saying front end, back end, security, data analyst, all the ones that we've talked about. And especially as a freshman, I think one piece of advice would be try to do a couple personal projects, even if you're starting from scratch in making a website or doing some kind of back-end project. If YouTube has a ton of different tutorials that you can learn from, and there's a bunch of great courses and resources that can help you get started. And from there, you can kind of find what you like and what you don't like, and then apply for what you think would be a good fit for you. And then once you have the application going, you can talk about the projects that you've done. And that's really going to be the stepping stone to getting to the interview stage, right? Because a lot of the times when you hand in your resume or they look over the application, they're not seeing that you've completed 121 or 221, right? These companies don't really know what that is. And unless you explicitly say, I've taken data structures, they won't really know. So if you say, I did a project involving Mongo or React, and that's the job that you're applying for, and they use those frameworks, that's really what's going to kind of bring you to the next phase and be able to get to the interview. Yeah, Shrey or Ryan, want to add on that?
I would just say for freshmen, I know that it's really competitive when applying for those general applications. So like if you just go to any company, you just apply for their general internship application for a position. It's really competitive. You're going against juniors, maybe seniors and sophomores that all have more experience than you. And they may have more projects, because they've had more time to work on some things. So it's really, really tough. But what I would do is, a lot of companies recently have been creating initiatives and programs for freshmen and sophomore to be able to get internships or internship-like experiences where you still get paid, you still get to do stuff. It's just not quote unquote labeled as like a general internship. It's more oriented towards freshman or sophomore. But what that means is you're not expected to have as much experience, and you still are able to get your foot in the door to industry. But those are amazing programs. I didn't know they were out there when I was a freshman or sophomore. And looking back on it, I wish I took advantage of those, because it's, at the end of the day, if you are in your fall semester freshman year, it's really, really hard to compete against juniors in the same position. So take advantage of those programs that are out there. They're built for freshmen and sophomores. They're built for you. So just, take all the advantages you can get. Yeah, Shrey said Google Step is a great one. Yeah, there's so many. And a lot of the really big companies are the ones that are leading these initiatives. So definitely take a look at those.
I think even Two Sigma opened one. You can have a look at it. And 1 second. So there's, yeah, I think we answered that one. How do you prepare for technical tests? Leak code, HackerRank, cracking the coding interview. That's one book you should always have. I had it just now. It's probably the best source of learning for interviews. You will clear so many topics that and each of those chapters, spend like days on each one of them, because each one of them is so important, because it'll teach you minute things that you don't think of. Like when you see the answer, oh, that's it. But when you go and do an interview, you realize like just reading through it doesn't make sense. You have to do each and every question by writing and coding and making sure that you understand all of the fundamentals for that. And I think Ryan and Jonathan would agree, like these three are the major things that at least I've done. They might do something different as well.
Yeah, I think Shrey hit it right. Probably the most well-known book for technical interviews is Cracking the Coding Interview. I think you can get it for like $10 on Amazon. I highly recommend it. A lot of people will say that's pretty much all you need to do well on your technical interview. If you read through that and do the practice problems, it'll really help get you through the technical interview. And then things like Leak Code and HackerRank. There's some other products like Algo Expert. Those can definitely help as well, but it only goes so far for the free tier until you need to start paying. But then I would also suggest another resource that I found. It's called pramp.com. I'll put it in the chat. And it basically stands for Practice Makes Perfect. And what that does is it sets you up with other students or other people who are preparing for technical interviews. And you schedule a time to do a technical interview, and it pairs you up with a completely random student, or you can also plan to do it with a friend, or I think they can also filter by university as well. And what it does is it sets you up like you're doing a regular technical interview with the company, but it's another student on the other side. You take turns giving each other an interview. So it'll set you up with a question. One of you will start out as the interviewer, and one of you will start out as the interviewee, and you'll spend an hour or 45 minutes. I don't know how much time it allots, but and then you'll switch. So it's completely free. I highly recommend it. You'll get to meet some random people, see how they think through the problems, and you'll eventually get better and better at it. So yeah.
Yeah, and just a few tips for when you're actually in the interview. Definitely talk out your thought process. I know a lot of us code and we just kind of get down into the code, don't really talk to anyone, but being able to describe to the interviewer what you're thinking and what you're trying to implement will help them understand how you solve problems. And another thing also is sometimes you'll get automated coding tests where it's not in front of an interviewer, but you're just supposed to fill it out. Normally it's in the earlier rounds of applying for an internship. What you want to do is, I've done a few of those in the past, and sometimes I don't finish it all the way through, and that's not a bad thing. And sometimes you're not expected to solve every problem, but if you provide, comments and describe how you were thinking about solving the problem, it can definitely get you to the next round. And a few times it actually has. I would walk out of that coding test and be like, oh, I didn't make it. I didn't even start one problem. But if they saw that you had a really good thought process for the first few, and that you really were just not just a great coder, but a great team player and being able to help others, then that's something they're looking for as well.
I totally agree. This is how cracking the coding interview looks like. If you just want to get it, there is. You can also find other types of. You might not want a hardbound copy. You might be able to find something online, but I would suggest you stick with the physical book because it's that important. Um, all right, next question. What mediums do you use to apply? HackerRank, direct applications, searching up recruiters, reaching out and applying there? Do you make a spreadsheet and organize them? Yeah. So I personally have made a Notion page this year with all of the different interviews. If you don't know what Notion is, go check it out. It's a cool tool. You have it for free with Camel, so you can get it, and it's really dope. But yeah, you do all of those. To be honest, you apply via their websites. You cold call, well, not cold call, cold message recruiters. You reach out to your contacts. Let's say you know some upper freshmen from, let's say, Aggie Coding Club. You can reach out to them, and they'll be happy to refer you to their recruiters, and go ahead from that point. You can also like go to like your professor whom you really like, and then they can set you up with jobs. That has happened a lot of times to me and my friends. So like you that's always a route. Like if the professor likes you and you like the professor, you can go to him or her and say that, hey, I'm on this job at this company and I know you're connected, can you help me reach out? They'd be more than happy to help you. How do you balance applying while also maintaining schoolwork? I personally don't sleep, so that's one way. But
Aggie Coding Club does not officially endorse this message.
but you can, like, okay, so it definitely gets harder during the fall semester when you have a lot of interviews lined up with a lot of coursework. But professors generally tend to agree to move up your deadlines. Like they are very familiar with the process for interviewing at, like, let's say a big name company might involve 7, 8 interviews versus at like a startup might involve even more because it's so much more narrow. The professors generally tend to like lower your homework or allow you to do it the next time, or even like postpone quizzes or allow you to take quizzes again. So it's all dependent on like how do you like approach it. But I definitely think it's challenging, but it's doable. Like you might play less games, or you might not eat at the same time every day, but that's something that you can take up against like getting an internship.
Yeah, I would say also like just the way I do it. I normally just go on like LinkedIn or Indeed and just search up like a job title that I want and check like a location and see who's hiring for that. If there's a big company that pops in my head, I'm like, ooh, let me see if they have an internship that I can apply to. So I just kind of think about it, and when I think of a company, I apply. The application process does get very boring because you're answering the same questions about yourself and doing the same stuff. But it is really important to keep it all in like one place. I do a Google sheet and I just say what the job title is, who it's with, what the status of the application is. So pending, rejected, offer. And then I leave a link to the actual application portal just so I can go back and check it if I'm not sure if I didn't get an email or something. Because sometimes companies will deny you, but not necessarily send you a notification. So I go in there every once in a while and check it out. And how do you balance applying while also maintaining schoolwork? I didn't do a really good job of that in the past. I would say apply to a few jobs every day. I know that I applied to a lot of jobs. I only heard back from probably 10 to 15% of them, just because maybe I didn't meet the qualifications or it wasn't the right position for me. But I applied to a lot of places, but just purely because I knew a lot of places might have better candidates, and so kind of not shooting your shot everywhere, but it's better to apply to a lot of places than to apply to a few places, because generally you're not going to have every company call you back and want to set up an interview unless you are just a really talented person. You're really only going to have a few, because there's just so many people trying to find a job that sometimes it's not always, were you the most qualified? It might be that they found a bunch of qualified people in the beginning of the hiring round and they just decided to stop looking and you applied later on. So I think just apply to as many places as you can that you see or you feel like you'd want to be interested in. But just note that as you apply to more places, especially if you're doing software engineering, there's a lot of automated coding tests that they make you do, especially at the bigger companies. So that might add to the amount of work you need to do to apply to these jobs. I know, like, if you do Twitter, they'll send you like a 2-hour coding test that you have to do. And so you get to pick and choose that time, but if you have 8 of those to do in a week, that really adds up. But yeah, Jonathan, do you have anything on this?
Yeah, I agree. I think on the organization front, I tend to use Trello. It's pretty much along the same lines as Ryan said, you know, status, link to whatever. And you just kind of pick your poison of what kind of organization tool you want to use. And then there's not really a big drawback or positive to any particular one. Just kind of keep tabs on, I think the status is the biggest thing. And yeah, and then I also linked in the chat, some people saw, it's a link to all the summer 2021 internships. It's updated pretty much at least a couple of times a day with links to applications for probably, I think, close to like 100 companies now. And that's continuing to grow. I would take a look through the companies that you see. Don't apply to all of them for sure. Now, click the link, see what the application says. If it's something that's interesting to you, if you're interested in the company, then go ahead and apply. Or you're going to be keeping tabs on a lot of different companies and applications that you really might not understand about or might not be interested at the end of the day. So yeah, it's kind of my 2 cents on that. Yeah, I think that's that. If you want to move to the next question, it says, when tasked with maintaining a large code base, what are some approaches you use to learn the ins and outs of how it functions? I would say for one of my internships, we were dealing with the code base. It was for an Android app, and we were dealing with a code base with like hundreds of different files, probably a couple 100,000 lines of code. But it really boils down to your specific project that you're working on or implementing a certain functionality within it, right? And you'll start to end up learning what the few, maybe dozen files that you need to look at are, and then how it communicates with everything else. I'm not sure if you're talking about if that's specifically at a company that has a large code base, or if you're starting out with a large code base. But yeah, if Trey or Ryan.
Yeah, I would say like you're more than likely going to come into a company that has maybe decade-old code, and there's going to be so much there that it's impossible to know every single in and out of it. But I would say if you do get an internship and you start working on a giant code base, that just get a top-level idea of what the application is designed to do. And then as you start working on different features or different stories, you'll start to get a really deep dive into specific parts or specific files that you're editing. And as you do that, and once you begin making edits to the code, you'll begin to truly understand it, because you'll understand how it works, how your new edits fit in there. And you'll start to learn a little bit of that code base really, really well. I don't think you'll ever know the entire thing front to back. But just knowing an idea of like, I need to give this function later on this information, how do I give it to it? You don't really know what the function does, but you just need to know you need to hand it a certain piece of information. So just kind of, yeah, I guess, yeah, you're not going to know fully in depth on everything, but knowing a surface level on most of the code base is great. And then as you go, you'll learn deeper about specific parts of it.
So this happened with me a couple times actually, and I literally don't like reading code. So I just talked with a bunch of engineers and understood what each, and like you can actually develop a big network using just that. Like you reach to a different engineer, ask them what this file does. If they don't know it, they'll probably point you to someone who knows it. So you keep in touch with the other engineers at the firm and understand what what every file is doing while also getting networked. Um, but Jonathan's and Ryan's ways are great. Like I, I'm just lazy. I wouldn't do that, to be honest. But I mean, whatever way makes you feel the most like appropriate, use that. Like there's no right way of maintaining it. There's no wrong way of. Well, there is definitely a wrong way of maintaining it, but there's no like big troubles that you can get in if you do it one way or the other way. It's totally dependent on how your interactions go in the company, and that's kind of the big take with internships. You don't only learn how to code, but you also learn how to communicate. You also learn how to network and learn stuff, because learning is a big part, and learning how to learn is also a big part of internships.
Yeah, and even if you don't know what something does, just ask questions. The full-time people and most companies, you'll have like a mentor. They're there to literally just help you. And so asking questions, I know like when I did my first internship, I didn't really ask a ton of stuff, and I should have, because I just spent so much time being confused when I could have just asked a question and gotten the feature done with and over with way sooner. Saved myself a lot of trouble. The next question is, or it was, did anyone hear about this programs for freshmen and sophomores? So Shrey posted a little bit above it. Google Step is one for freshmen and sophomores, as well as Facebook University, Microsoft Explore, and then Amazon Future Engineer is one as well. And so I would just, if you can think of like a company you want to work for, look and see if they have a program for it. And if not, then just take an application for their general position as well. Just note that, like, you know, your competition will be a little bit harder to make yourself like prominent and you know, a preferable candidate. But if they have those programs, then apply to them, you know, for sure.
One thing that we hardly mentioned was internships are also for having fun. Like, don't just think of them as work. Like, have fun. Like, I spent my first internship. I can say like I spent at least 30% of my time just performing magic to my manager and just wasting time, and they were fine with it because like everyone was having fun, everyone was enjoying it, and like I was at a consulting firm, and we even made stickers where it says like, "Danger, Tim's code is running," and Tim was our manager, and he was cool with it. So like you can do fun stuff with like everyone, make friends, and just don't just code.
Yeah, I agree with Sherry on that. A lot of the internship opportunities will have these experiences for you to go do, events for you to go to, and it's just so much fun meeting new people every summer. And some of them, like, they just become your friends, and you keep up with each other during the semesters, even though you go to different schools. But it's just an overall like really great experience. And like Trey said, it's not just about work. At the end of the day, in 10 weeks, you can't really produce a ton of stuff for a company or anything that's like of really, really, really significant value. Sure, it'll help for the product, but like you're not going to be the inventor of Google Maps in 10 weeks. But you're there to make a difference and to learn and to have fun. I think that's the whole point of the internship.
Yep. If you have any more questions, just keep putting them in the chat.
Yeah, Joshua. Yeah, a recording will be of the workshop, and I believe the company talk as well.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
So what's the level of coding like as you guys did in any internship that you guys talked about? Like what was the level of like any language you guys used in that place?
Um, this makes a good transition point, to be honest. Ryan, you just want to do those next ones?
Yeah, why don't we answer the question real quick and then yeah, we can go
Yeah.
into that. But yeah, for that question, you're just asking like, what's the level of experience required for like for that job? Was
So
that the
like
question?
so you said you had an internship. So what was the level of the programming languages skill that you used in that specific place that you worked in?
Okay. It really depends on the extent of needing to know the language really depends on what you're working on. If you're working on a product that's been there for a while, normally you're making edits. You're not making a ton of new features. So a lot of the times your changes are really small and you don't need to be a master of the language in order to kind of understand the problem and how to implement it. Implement the right solution. So I know like a lot of my stories would be maybe 3 or 4 line changes, and they were really important changes, but like I didn't need to know a ton of stuff or I have to create a lot of new things in order to do it. But if you're working in a team that's creating a brand new product that's never been released to the public before, then it's a little bit harder because you're having to create new stuff from scratch. And so then you might need a little bit more experience. But in the interview process, the interviewer already knows the demands of their team and what they need from an intern that summer. And so they're going to hire accordingly. So I wouldn't say that you need to necessarily prep yourself for that. They'll know if you're the right fit for the job or not, purely off what they expect the intern to work on that summer.
I will also add a point where all of the internships I've had, I've never coded in a language that I already knew. Every time I had an internship, it was a new language that I learned there. It was C#, JavaScript, TypeScript. I didn't know any one of them. I learned it there, and they're very like helpful, like learning new languages. I did not know React before going to an internship, and I coded an application in React, and it was really fun because you get to interact with this other person who is an expert in it and understand it from their perspective as well. So I don't think like the complexity of the language or the code matters as much as what you get out of it.
Definitely. Do we want to go into the what we've done segment?
Yeah.
And if there's any more questions, we can feel free to ask them in the chat, and we'll stop and answer them.
So
Next segment. Oh, go ahead.
What?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah. So what have we done? Like let's just go through our internships and understand like what each one of them took technically and mostly technically, but also understanding like how each one of them was different than the other one.
Yeah, so we decided to go with a creative theme here. So some of the bubbles that sum up some of the technologies we use at these places. You'll notice we have some bubbles around our heads as well. There are some dashed lines. Don't know, we never really agreed on what they were, but I think they're just byproducts of us having these experiences, what we've learned and what we still are learning today. Maybe an internship inspired us to learn a new technology, or these are things that we started and we are continuing to use. But I know I started my first internship at a company called Zix. They make a email encryption software, and they sell it to some high performing clients. But when I went there, I worked on their web services, or no, actually, sorry, let me rephrase. When I first went there, I worked for their quality assurance team, and I worked on their mobile app development. So I would be testing new features that were being implemented in their Android and iOS apps. For that, I used a lot of Selenium to kind of test the apps. That uses Java in the background, as well as just running through the tests on the phones themselves. I would load up the apps and just use a phone and see, will this break or not? And I really like that because they had like 50 or 70 different types of phones there, because especially with Android, you have to code for so many different types of screen sizes and internal like resources that you have to test them on a lot of phones. So I got to like play with a bunch of cool technology and learn a little bit more about that side. And then I returned there for a second summer, and I worked in their software development team, where I worked on one of their web management portals. And that used Ruby on Rails. Ruby is an object-oriented language. It's kind of like Java, but Rails is a kind of addition on top of it, and it's more for web development. And so, like Shrey said, I knew nothing about Ruby or Ruby on Rails before I went there. And I spent maybe the first 2 weeks just getting myself comfortable to where when I read Ruby on Rails code, I would be able to understand what it was trying to do. And so when I was implementing new features, I really didn't quite know exactly how to start off. I knew what I needed to implement. And so I would do a lot of Googling, like, I mean, it could be even stupid stuff like how to write a loop in Ruby, because maybe the syntax looks different. So I would just look up a bunch of stuff, and that's kind of how I learned that language over that summer, was just doing a lot of Googling, asking a lot of questions. And then those bottom two bubbles are, I interacted with some, we talked about infrastructure and DevOps earlier. These are two tools. The whale is Docker, the blue whale, and the little guy with the napkin over his arm is Jenkins. There are two different types of DevOps tools that are used in a lot of software development teams. But that was kind of a byproduct. I got to learn those there, and my future experiences and my current, we use them there as well too. So it was kind of like my starting grounds for those softwares. And then last summer, or this last summer, and right now I work for State Farm, and I work in the information security department. That's kind of what I like to do. So not so much on like creating software, but more of just maintaining the security of the company. So I work there. I work on their threat hunt team, and through that, I do a lot of Python work, like a lot of Python work. The bottom two bubbles are tools called Splunk and Phantom, which is made by Splunk. But basically all you need to know is Splunk holds all our data and makes it super searchable. And then Phantom is a automation tool that interacts with Splunk. And that uses Python. So I've been every day, even today, I worked with our scripts, and we automate a lot of these tasks. So we'll get a big data set come in, being able to just automate through there and extracting some valuable stuff, and then creating alerts for humans to go in and kind of piece together with the story that's happening there, is our problem. And it's a lot of fun trying to figure out how to solve it, because there's new threats in everything that you see. And then the top bubble is Kibana. It's similar to Splunk, but you'll see Kibana in a lot more stacks and software development teams as well. It's another place where you can just store a lot of data and then query for it later. A lot of the times you'll put your logs in Kibana, so you can search for those later. And then those little bubbles around my head, the bottom right is with the little cat is Git and GitHub. I use that at every single internship I've had and every experience. Version control, like we said in our first workshop, is a must to learn. And so you don't need to know the ins and outs of it really. And I don't even think when they're hiring you, they really expect you to have a great grasp on it. But it's something that you'll learn through those internships, and you'll use as a student, and as a, if you work on a personal project, you'll use it there too. Node.js I've used at Zix, and I've since then implemented in some personal projects. I know I entered one of the workshop or the competitions for ACC last year, and I was able to use Node to develop my entry for it. And then React is the bottom left one, for like the little atom. That's another web development tool. It's kind of like Rails. It's a JavaScript framework, and like Shrey was saying, it's just used. It's really cool to see how fast you can make websites with it and how modular they can be. But I learned a little bit of that at Zix and State Farm, but I'm still to this day trying to implement it in some personal projects and learn more about it, because it's a really cool software. There's a lot of applications for it. Oh, I just had a real quick question. What are some of the projects you've worked on using Python? So I know, like, personally, outside of like internships, if I ever have some like remedial task that I hate doing, I normally create a Python script for it. If that's like cleaning up files, like if I have, I'm working on a coding project and I have a bunch of files that are produced and I want to clean them up, I'll make a Python script to just delete them. But just coming up with like some weird problem, maybe even like I heard in the bot creation earlier today that they were saying like a weather app. Maybe you just want to figure out what the weather is through your terminal. And that's a weird thing. And maybe there's not a big audience for it, but just coming up with something that you might want to use later on or see if you can even do is a really cool way of just working with Python. But it's a really fun language to use, and it's pretty easy to get started with. It's really grammatical. So when you type out like a statement, you can use words like and or instead of symbols to represent it. But yeah, and yeah, we are required to wear khakis. I'm just kidding, but yeah, State Farm's been a great experience. I like their commercials too. I think that's it.
Cool. Yeah. A lot of great technologies that you use. I've had 3 very different roles till now. I'll go from 1 o'clock all the way to 12 o'clock. So Google, this is what I started as a freshman. I got Google Student Innovator, which is kind of working with the Google Cloud engineers, talking with them, working on new products. And then I transitioned into Google Developer Student called Lead, which I was last year. And that kind of involved a lot of public speaking and just, again, interacting with a bunch of people at Google, all the way from like, let's say like technical heads, product managers to just people in marketing, and just talking with them, making sure that we get the idea across and just stuff like that. My first internship was at DFW Consulting. This is what I was talking about, that one of the companies liked me so much that they sent my resume to the other company and they referred me to DFW Consulting, which then hired me as an intern. With DFW Consulting, most of my work involved coding up tools that would make a software faster. So I don't know if many of you are familiar with Revit. I wasn't when I joined DFW Consulting. Revit is just like a 3D modeling software. It's if you know what AutoCAD is, it's like AutoCAD but with another dimension, if that makes sense. But my job was essentially to just make a tool that would allow quick labeling of structures in Revit with like, so all of these plans would then go to the government for approval. So everything must be in a certain way. So all that my tool did was quite literally create labels for everything on the table, or everything on the drawing board, and then import them and export them in faster ways. So like there might be 50,000 labels in one sheet and you have to export them to another sheet. Usually engineers before that had to copy paste each one in the way where they would have to basically recreate the label for every single drawing version that they made for that drawing. So my job was basically to create a tool that can copy it and easily create it for them. The other things that I did was I worked on a database management system and an internal website and a lot of different stuff, which used like, so most of my coding was in .NET and C#, which was for Revit, but then I used GCP and Python for hosting a website, hosting databases, and other tiny stuff that I had to do there. Then comes software.com, which is where my current internship was, and I've worked for them for over 6 months now. But yeah, with software, we make tools which aid in coding, and like tools like that give you metrics on how many hours you've coded, and we use AI in the back end and getting you productivity ratios and like just trying to improve you as a coder. Most of my work has been different things. I've done website development using React, Gatsby, and Node. I have done backend stuff using SQL, and MariaDB is kind of like MySQL, but with additional props to it, where like you can do weird things on the database that you cannot with MySQL. A lot of AWS hosting is very important, and it's very needs to be in a very specific manner, otherwise your whole system would not work. And most of my past summer was coding in TypeScript and JavaScript for VS Code plugin. And I actually, so this past summer, this was the first time that I think I've developed the whole product. So I went through the whole product development cycle where I created like a Figma mockup, then did a lot of consumer interviews, developed it in VS Code, developed a plugin, marketed it. So did a lot of Twitter ads, Facebook ads, Google ads, understanding how all of that ad structure works, and finally launched the product. So I would suggest if you get a chance to go through the whole product cycle, please do. It probably helps you learn way more than you learn in college, because I learned about so many things about like keeping track of customers, understanding how customers are interacting with your tool. All of these things that you never think about comes in when you develop a product and just go through the whole cycle. And for me, the dotted lines represent which tools I have used overall in every one of the internships. Python comes in really handy because it's such a versatile language. Like you can use it for anything. Like if like with Google, I wrote scripts with it. With DFW Consulting, I wrote a bunch of backends with it. With software, it was more or less just for sorting data, understanding what the data meant, and just going through that. GitHub is probably one of the more important tools that you will ever use in the internship, and it'll stay the same. Everyone uses GitHub. It's important. You need to learn it. There's no way of getting around it. And just understanding some basic HTML and CSS is also important. For like, let's say even learning React, you need to understand what HTML, CSS is, or like even creating a tiny plugin. Like what I did, we used HTML and CSS to use web views, which is just a better UI inside of VS Code. And that's kind of what you're dealing with in an internship. And there's a bunch of other tools that you use, but obviously there wasn't enough space. But like you kind of get the idea that how every internship can be so different and so versatile, and it's just have one, and like you learn quite a bit. And I did not know any of these topics before I went to the internship, right? So like you learn all of these things by going to an internship. Jonathan?
Yeah, okay. So try to be brief here. I'll go from left to right. So my first internship, I had a position at the Washington Post in DC. So I was working on the Android team. My project specifically was, I had a few other like stories or tickets to do, but the bulk of the project was implementing something called picture-in-picture for their two mobile apps. So it's basically a function for their video where you click a button and be able to take the video down into a smaller screen and view like articles while you're seeing the video. And then you can also exit the app, and then the video is going to keep on playing in that screen. And before the internship, I never really did any Android development. I did a little bit of a cross-platform framework called Flutter, which is on the bottom there. And that basically allows you to deploy an application to both iOS and Android, but it's coded in Dart, which is kind of similar to Java. I knew Java beforehand, but never really done native Android. So that was basically my project. And the stack there was mainly Java, but Kotlin is now kind of the new standard for Android development. And they had a rule where whenever you would make a new class or file, it would be Kotlin instead of Java. So experimented a little bit with that, but it was mostly Java based there. And then once you kind of would create your changes and push those, use GitHub, you would send it off to build on Jenkins. I think Ryan had some experience with Jenkins as well. So that's basically a build tool to validate that it's able to compile your application and run the unit tests on that as well. I worked with the design team would pass on how they kind of wanted it to look and all the changes through an application called Envision, similar to Figma. And then we used Jira for our sprints, which is that top left blue bubble. And then my internship this past summer was at American Express. And I was working on the database team, and I was making a React dashboard for them. So that was my first time doing React. And I never did JavaScript before either. So that was my first time doing that. Pretty interesting. I learned some new languages and quite a bit of frameworks as well. One of which is Jest, which is a unit testing framework. But I also delved into a little bit of their backend, which was in Java. And their backend was built using Spring Boot, which is basically, the Java equivalent of something like Flask or Node.js, but quite a bit more complicated because of all the, they have a bunch of security rules and things like that. And we're also tinkering with some Okta implementation as well. And then there we used Bitbucket, which is a different competitor to GitHub, but they're actually moving to GitHub as well. So GitHub is definitely kind of the top remote repository company right now. And then finally, I also did a bit of work last summer at CodePath. And if you saw earlier, we talked a little bit about Facebook University for freshmen. So CodePath is kind of contracted through Facebook to deliver Facebook University. So I was one of the TAs for Facebook University, helped teach the Android course there. So I highly recommend, if you guys are freshmen and are interested, apply to Facebook University. And yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Just right next slide. And yeah, if you have any questions, if not, Alston, you want to wrap up?
Sure thing. Yeah, if there's any more questions, probably direct them to the officers in the Discord. One last reminder for tonight is that the project member signups are closing at midnight tonight. So be sure to get in any signups in before then. And then we'll be announcing the placements and so on sometime later this week. I think it's going to be Wednesday, not entirely certain on that. But we will see you guys next Monday.